How's it, Oaks? Because 2020 has been such an omni-shambling catastrophe, we've decided to complement the annual awards of the year with a video of the year in review. And joining me are two esteemed profiles: Hannes Wessels, author of the Men of War trilogy, and Guns, Golf and Glory, co-written by Nick Price. Hannes was a former prosecutor, is a former prosecutor, a professional hunter, and an acclaimed military historian. His website is www.africaunauthorized.com. Douglas Rogers needs no introduction, the best-selling author of 2 Weeks in November and The Last Resort. Douglas joins us today from Virginia. Both of these oaks are white Zimbabweans who know a little bit about war, which probably makes them the finest of the fighting species, except for the BBC. The BBC hates white Zimbabweans, and you oaks will never ever get onto the BBC. The BBC only like white oaks like Jimmy Savile, Gary Glitter, and Rolf Harris. Anyways, thank you for joining me. And just a word on housekeeping. We're going to keep this very informal. We've decided to choose three stories each that we consider worthy of comment. We're going to discuss them. We're going to discuss them amongst each other. We're going to drink a bit of single malt and basically nothing too serious. I'm going to hand over to Hannes, who's going to take us through his first topic of the BizNews.com year in review. Over to you, Hannes.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk. What I'd like to talk about straight off the bat is this the Islamic insurgency that's spreading through northern Mozambique at the moment. And I see it as a huge problem that seems to be spinning rapidly out of control. It started up north in the Sahel. Most of the countries of the Sahel, Niger, Mali, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Nigeria, all have been battling Islamic insurgencies of some shape or form, and it's spreading south into the Congo and now into northern Mozambique, so it's not far from home. It's seems to be very well organized, and there's some very heavy hitters in play. There's a lot of drug money that comes into the equation. So these chaps are well funded, they're well organized, and at the moment it looks like they've got the run of the place, and it's coming south. There's talk of them now being able to impose themselves on Cabora Bassa, which has huge strategic implications for the region, and there's not a lot in the way of a reaction or a meaningful reaction. This has really gained traction up in Mozambique, as it has in other countries in Africa, through a governance deficit. These countries have ignored their populace for too long, and people are very disenchanted, and so they're looking for alternatives, and they haven't got an awful lot to lose. And this is what's happening throughout Africa. You know, I actually look at a lot of these countries in Africa, and all the systems and structures that were put in place during the colonial period have either collapsed or are collapsing. And in a lot of African countries, the central government doesn't really have any ability to project its power beyond the capital city. In some cases, they don't even run the capital city. So, you know, it's fertile ground for insurrections and insurgencies, and this is what's happening. It's now happening in Mozambique. And as I say, everybody seems to be sitting on their hands. The regional powers don't really seem to know what to do, and militarily they are poorly placed to mount an effective response. The Mozambique Defense Force is in disarray. So there is a look to the European powers, but I think they're terrified of getting involved in anything like this in Africa. So they're offering sort of financial support. And the Americans, unfortunately, a lot of this this movement is Saudi backed. And the Americans have an unofficial alliance with the Saudis and the Israelis. And so the Americans are between a rock and a hard place because they're not too keen to get involved against movements that are backed by an ally. So there's a conflict of interest here. And so the only possible response I can see is from the private sector. And that's a little embarrassing because these are groups made up of the villains of old from the Rhodesian and South African security forces. They are multiracial, but most of the leadership element is white. But these guys have got all the skills to go in there and do something. But as I say, it's a little embarrassing to turn to them. But I know Urban Bala has resurrected executive outcomes. There's Airborne Services, which is another company that's in the wings. There are South African, there are constraints, legal constraints in South Africa, which one has to take into account. But I think, you know, those guys, if they were given a chance, they could go in and start making an impression. But as I say, nobody really wants to reach out to those guys. So where it goes from here, I don't know.
Sure.
What I find fascinating about that part of the world, northern Mozambique, this is something maybe that your audience would be interested in. I mean, it's spectacularly, where this is happening is sort of on the northern coast, and it's a spectacular coastline. And it's the sort of dichotomy with this beautiful tropical paradise and this absolute brutality. I mean, the way people are being killed there and the numbers is appalling. And it's kind of ignored. I mean, it's obviously, it's reported in South Africa, but I don't know how much is known about it in the rest of the world.
It's not getting a lot of coverage. That's quite correct. And yeah, some very, very gruesome stories coming out of there. You never know quite what is to believe, but yeah, the beheadings. Apparently, there are different groups. There's Islamic State and there's Al Qaeda involved, and it's the Islamic State that is particularly dangerous, and I believe they are more involved in the Mozambique situation than anybody else. But there's also you've got to factor in.
So you got ISIS and coming to Constantia Village, Kiev. That's going to be great.
Well, sadly, Simon, I think that's part of the problem. There are cells probably within anyway, which can be activated. So I think that's why the South African government is.
Yeah, but they don't have any capacity to deal with that anyway. In 2010, for the World Cup, the Al-Shabaab was threatening the peace of the FIFA 2010 World Cup. It was just like a corrupt mess as it was. And our oaks, they were nowhere to be found. Well, they were somewhere to be found. They were at Alan Jack's Butcher Shop and Grill in Sandton City on Friday afternoons, plundering through the slush fund on bottles of Meerlust. That's where they were. So the rumor is that they got rid of Al-Shabaab by just paying them off. And subsequently we had a peaceful tournament. But from a crime intelligence and a national security perspective, you can't expect. Sorry, it's not laughing matter. It's actually a very serious issue that you've brought up first. So yeah. Nice way to start is Douglas. Do you want to bring us into your first item of
well, greetings from Virginia. I'm in my armchair outside of Washington D.C. We're going to give you my armchair analysis of the US's year, and as you say, 2020 has been an absolute nightmare for everyone. I have a subject. I'm going to call it failing upwards. And the last time I really sort of wrote anything, discussed American politics, was actually 4 years ago, immediately after the election of Trump, November 2016. And I remember what a shock it was to the experts, journalists, media analysts, political experts, pollsters, okay? And I remember thinking that these people who are telling us, reporting on what was obviously an incredibly important time, got it completely wrong. But it turns out they failed upwards, because the same people are still the experts today. And they got it not completely wrong this time, because although they said Biden was going to win, they said he'd win in a landslide. And we heard this month after month after month that this was going to be a landslide win for the Democrat candidate. But it turned out to be a bit of a nail biter. The state's still being contested now. It's about how many weeks on? We're about 4 weeks on from the election. And I just sort of looking back at how wrong the polls were. There was, Florida was supposed to go to Biden by 3 or 4 points. It went to Trump by 3 or 4 points. That's like an 8 points difference, right? It's a vital swing state. Ohio was touch and go. I think it was even. It ended up Trump winning it, I think by 8, which is a staggering difference. Wisconsin, the ABC Washington Post poll had Biden winning Wisconsin by 17 points the day before the election. And I think Biden has won it by 20 or 30,000 votes. It's quite extraordinary how wrong they were. But I want to sort of, the same people who were wrong then are obviously in charge now. And what happens is that they fail upwards. There's no consequence for it. I see this in other fields in the American scene, right? I'll give you a couple of examples with COVID, or rather like the experts on COVID, who, when this thing started in February, March, we were told that we shouldn't wear masks by Fauci, by the Surgeon General. And then a few weeks later, they come and said, yeah, you should wear masks. We were lying to you for your own good, okay? Because they didn't have the PPE, right? And at that point, you think, well, what are we being told here? How can we trust anything you guys are saying? Another point, COVID-related, was Governor Cuomo in New York, who oversaw, I think, the
genocide of old people.
Death rate. What's that?
The genocide of old people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he passed a law that mandated that retire or health or care homes had to take COVID positive patients. Something like 5,000 or 6,000 positive patients were returned to homes where they then infected thousands of other people. So that's one thing. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, right? Trump's made many mistakes. They've all made mistakes in this period where it was very hard to know what was going on. But the difference is Cuomo has now written a book about leadership, which is a bestseller. He won an Emmy Award for his performance, literally an Emmy Award. And I look at this and think, this is our expert class. And they're rewarded for these failures. And I just feel that at some point there has to be some kind of backlash against this. And I feel it may be brewing. There's one other thing I wanted to point out was a story in California where the Governor Newsom, on the same weekend in which he said you're not going to allow gatherings of your family members over Thanksgiving. That exact same weekend, he was maskless in the most expensive, famous restaurant in America.
In California, yeah.
Health advisors.
Yeah, his lobbyists.
Yeah. Right, it's lobbyists, exactly. So that's basically, that's my rant, is our expert class continue failing and continue getting rewarded for it.
Very good. Okay, so comparatively, my first topic for the review is boring. and predictable. That's the UK's response to COVID-19 in two parts. Firstly, the involvement of Imperial College, and secondly, the track and trace disaster, in which I'm going to make a point about your failing upwards just now. But I went to Cape Town at the end of February for holiday, and then I came back, and this was a completely different country. And it was that way because Imperial College, which is basically Bill Gates' patsy in Europe, and that's not a conspiracy. They work together. He funds them generously. It was edging closer to the era of Downing Street the week before the 23rd of March, which was the announcement of the lockdown. A guy called Professor Neil Ferguson ran squealing into Boris Johnson's office with a computer-generated fatality projection model, which has since been thoroughly fisked, criticized, and even led to one of his former colleagues suggesting he faces charges of scientific misconduct. And it was at that moment that this panic contagion was prompted. And you can't say that Imperial College influenced the world, but there is no doubt that extracts of the hard lockdown policy were influential in certain jurisdictions. And funnily enough, okay, and this is when people shut themselves. And the only thing that stopped this happening was actually one of the first things to stop this happening was Ferguson himself, because Ferguson summoned his married lover to come and service him, okay? And then people started asking, if this virus is as deadly as you say it is, why are you trying to kill her? And in his defense, she used to work for an organization affiliated with George Soros. And in my experience, people who work for George Soros are very, very annoying. But, that's irrelevant. The fact is that it was then, at the discovery of such breathtaking hypocrisy, that skepticism mainstreamed. And it is today in a form, it's a realistic and responsible form of resistance, thanks to largely Ferguson's own behavior. Yeah. And then the second issue is the disaster of track and trace, which today calculated at £22 billion. £22 billion to fuck something up, okay? It's quite serious. Anyway, so what happened was the British government decided that it was going to do a measurement-based response to COVID, and that it would follow the virus as it moved through small towns, the hospitals, and so on. And this project was called Track and Trace. And to lead a hugely technical project, okay, the British government appointed someone who's not technical at all, and in fact, a failed CEO. Her name's Dido Harding. And her former job, she was a McKinsey partner. I love McKinsey, okay? They're never at the scene with the smoking gun, but they're always loitering nearby. They're always near the scene of the crime, okay? She was a former McKinsey partner. She was also the former CEO of TalkTalk, which is a mobile firm. And under her leadership, 4 million customers had their sensitive data stolen, okay? And the share price obviously plunged. So you look at this woman, but then you realize, okay, she occupies that passage between the private sector and political insiders. So in the Northwest province, she gets appointed to this project and there's no real oversight and so on. She leads it. It's been a disaster. In the Northwest province, you call this 10-day irregularity, okay? It's the same thing here, except here it's dressed up in coattails and it's off to have a scotch with its chinas at a gentleman's club in St. James. That's all it is. There's no difference. Tomorrow's story is the vaccine. I don't think that really, but if it is what it is, then these pharmaceutical giants who get such a bollocking from everyone else are probably going to have a period of grace, of admiration, and at the cost of campaigns and organizations like Extinction Rebellion, who whose entire ethos is to resist companies like Pfizer or Moderna, and what have these guys done? If it is what it is, they've pulled something quite remarkable out the hat. But as I said, that's tomorrow's story. So, anyways, Alex, that's my first contribution to our year-end review.
but in there, it's what Douglas was saying earlier. These guys are not accountable. This,
Exactly.
Neil Ferguson, he has triggered incalculable damage
Of
through
course.
flawed data. But does this guy held seriously accountable in any shape or form? I don't think so.
Not at all. His politics
I think
are left of
it's
center.
disgusting.
His politics are the same politics that, you know, and another thing about this, Douglas, is Dido Harding failing upwards, classic example. But another point is that, you know, when this Ferguson and these people started this nonsense, you know, they took power away from an economy that had largely been established on the backs of small businesses. The city of London owes its entire existence to a legacy of free market, of clever people doing what they can, being allowed to do what they can, being allowed to trade, and the power was handed to this group of left academic who under whose advice we are subjected to. They inform the government, and then the government tells us what's going on. So yeah, this whole thing is. Should we go on to? Sorry,
Well,
Douglas.
well, actually, sorry,
Well,
Douglas.
I did have a thought about it. Is related to what you're saying, is that there seems to be a massive transfer of wealth happening from Main Street businesses, small businesses, to big corporate businesses. Like I mean, I don't want to get this disease, right? No one wants to get COVID, right? But I find it quite disturbing that a small restaurant is going out of business, but I can go to Walmart or Costco or Target on any day in my town, and it's crowded. It's crowded with thousands of people inside it. And I just feel these guys who are, I don't know, invested in everything in a restaurant, in a bar, being told that you're closing down. And at the same time, these big transnational corporations are going great guns. They're making a killing. And
Very
again,
sad.
it's
Tragic.
probably related to what I'm going to chat about my next time around, but it's sort of coming apart that I see, and I don't know how this can keep going when you've lost trust on the one hand, but then you also see big business making a killing at the expense of the little, you know.
Yeah. All right, Hannes, liven us up with your second choice.
Well, actually, what I wanted to touch on follows on from what we're discussing, actually, in a way, because it's this whole question of the environment and who do we believe when it comes to this issue of so-called global warming and climate change. And again, I've got a real problem with the scientists, and this sounds a little bit impertinent coming from an idiot who knows nothing about science. But I've just learned the hard way about not believing so-called experts. And from what I can gather, a lot of what they were predicting in the global warming debate has been proved to be incorrect. And yet we're still in the grip of all sorts of, all sorts of panic about what's happening to the planet. Where I lose a lot of faith in these so-called environmentalists is because I'm an African, and I know Africa quite well, and I've seen a lot of what's happening. And I don't believe there's any continent on the planet that is suffering more man-made damage than Africa. And yet, when it comes to Africa, these environmentalists and green movement people go very quiet. One of the problems besetting Africa is overpopulation. There is massive population growth. There's a massive increase in poverty. And as a result, combined with very primitive agricultural methods and slash and burn agriculture, Africa is being turned into a dust bowl, and it's happening before our eyes. But you don't hear a squeak from all these environmentalists about this. They love taking aim at a juicy target like Trump. If you can somehow blame him for global warming, then they're in a frenzy, or the industrialized West. But China doesn't seem to get an awful lot of criticism. Neither does Asia. And Africa, nobody cares. And I watch Africa being torched every year. They talk about carbon emissions. Well, the whole continent is set ablaze just about every year in bushfires. The Chinese are logging the hell out of the place. Carbon, the charcoal guys are chopping down woodland to provide energy. So there's a rapidly unfolding environmental disaster here, and nobody gives a damn.
That's interesting. I mean, what do you say about the consort of the Prime Minister of Britain, now an unelected, jumped up private schoolgirl, shouting her mouth off about environmental, and obviously in today's societal structure, holding tremendous influence, despite being unelected. What do you say about that? Because she's like properly green. She's like,
they sicken me. It's this virtue signaling cult, and they love it. They all grow their fan clubs by saying all the right things, and it works for them. But God knows if only they knew how much damage was being done while they all make the right noises. But I don't suppose they ever will, nor do they care, really. I don't think there's a dwindling minority of us here who do care. But unfortunately, we don't really have the means to come to terms with a lot of what's happening.
That is you were mentioning like logging. Last time I was in Mozambique 2 years ago, northern Mozambique, not quite as far as Cabo Delgado, which is what you were talking about earlier. But the logging there it's unbelievable. Like massive trucks of timber forests just being pillaged and sent to Beira on ships to go to, I don't know, Middle East, China.
Yeah.
It's really an ecological disaster.
It's continuing at pace. There's no stopping these guys. They've just got too much control. I don't know how much longer this can last. But I don't see any solutions. I wish I did. It's Chinese have got terrific control in Africa now, as you know, which isn't going down well with the run-of-the-mill populace, but it works for the political elite, and so they're not going anywhere.
Douglas, why don't you take us through your second item?
My second item, it's following on from what I spoke about earlier, and I'm going to try and put a more positive spin on it, maybe than I had done. So I'm going to call it the coming apart, and it's specifically my concern that in the United States, we've gone from 4 years of a presidency in which half the country did not believe the president was legitimate. And I think we're going to enter into another 4 years in which half the country do not believe that the president is legitimate. And I don't know how, this is a very unhealthy situation to be in. And it's related to, I heard the cartoonist, Scott Adams. Is it Scott Adams?
Not the
Dilbert.
Yes.
Who said that he has this metaphor where he says there are two movies going on, and half of America is watching one movie and the other half is watching the other. And it's related to this idea we're all living in curated news spaces where we read what we want to read, we follow who we want to follow, and the other side are reading who they want to read, right? So there's very little coming together of, there's very little unifying us anymore. So I have a very, like a gloomy prognosis for this country. I don't know if how you recover from being so divided. And I think like the idea that the United States has always been this beacon that everyone looked up to is rapidly fading. I'll say a little bit about, so 4 years of Trump, he was, the Russia collusion investigation in which half the country believed that Russia influenced the elections of 4 years ago, either directly or indirectly through things like Facebook ads. Okay, that was a very damaging we had a massive investigation, right? We now
came to nothing.
Of questioning the election results that we had four weeks ago, right? And I did have one relating to, I come from Zimbabwe, right? And Zimbabwe has, I believe, the last 4 elections have been rigged, right? Or rather, half of Zimbabwe believes they're rigged, the other half believe that the other side, that they win, right? And so I had this idea, and I think it's a good idea, but it'll never be taken up because it won't work. Well, it would work, but that's why it wouldn't get taken up. But it's to have a complete forensic analysis of the election, right? In the same way as there was a massive investigation into the influence of Russia. Okay, so I was thinking that if you're from a country like Zimbabwe where you believe that elections are stolen, or half the country does, you should want this in the United States so that we actually clear up. There is no doubt anymore. That's what I'm going to. I love where there was no doubt that who won our election, right? And half of this country do not believe Trump won properly. The other half this time don't believe Biden won properly, right? Yeah. I would love a forensic analysis or investigation into maybe these 5-6 swing states. And if you're a Trump supporter, you should want that. And if you're a Biden supporter, you should want to humiliate Trump again by having that. And ultimately, the result of it should be that you clear up all doubt. And I believe that would be a unifying thing in this country. I don't know how we carry on with living in these two movies, the two movies that Scott.
Very dangerous.
Wow.
It's fascinating.
What you say is so right, you know, and I can't help but get the impression that there isn't a massive amount of excitement about Biden. You know, even if he is the popular winner, he's just such a weak candidate. How many Americans are really excited about the next 4 years with Biden and Harris? I don't know the answer, but I get the impression that there's not a huge amount of enthusiasm.
Well, we can talk about, I think the last section was a bit about like the legacy of Trump. I think you're right on one hand, yeah, lack of enthusiasm, but I think, and again, we talk about the last segment, but the enthusiasm against Trump was enormous, and not necessarily Biden. And I think that's the and that's his doing, but Trump's doing, you know. We can talk about that in the last section.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my second item of 2020 was the Twitter's suspension of their New York Post account relating to the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, which incidentally, in the last week, it's been revealed that everything that we were told was bullshit, okay, is actually on there. They've decided to take the least offensive item as a dripped feed, which is their tax fraud from China. But what struck me as extraordinary was how South Africans, some of my friends, could so easily absorb the story of the Gupta server as legitimate, but the case of Hunter Biden's laptop was regarded as being a political skullduggery. Anyways, to the point I'm making about Twitter, if you look at Jack Dorsey, if you listen to what he says, if you can understand what he says, this strange behavior is it's indicative of someone who's trying to massacre the link between action and reaction, and he's doing that because he can't control that company anymore. It is completely out of control, and it's run by a bunch of people. Glenn Greenwald, who we all really respect and admire, his point of Twitter is that it was never a censorious entity. It didn't have that purpose, and that's because in the personality profiles of tech geeks, okay, freedom of speech is an obscurity to these people. It doesn't feature as isolated loners. They don't think about the freedom of speech and its impact, okay? But what happened was, according to Glenn Greenwald, was that Twitter started being harassed by the tech writers of corporate media who started saying, oh, look, there's a Nazi, ban him, okay? And thus prompted this whole situation. And what they did was, they didn't know it at the time, is they were handing over this hugely sensitive political tool that not even the learned wisdom of appointed Supreme Court judges should be handling. They were tinkering with the political tool of censorship, and they were handing it over to a bunch of technologists. Are you fucking mad? And look what's happened. Look at these guys. Look at the consequences. I'll give you a case in point. Brian Armstrong is the CEO of Coinbase, which is this wonderful crypto exchange. I've been using it for years. But September this year, he writes a long article about how his organization is a mission-oriented company. And as someone who uses it and has used it for a while, I was delighted with that, because every founder should have the opportunity to insulate his company from woke contamination. And that's exactly what he did. And you know, the response to that, it was a long article, and he said, if you want to bring other stuff into a business where we're trying to keep objective, I'll pay you like 5% or whatever, just leave, you can go, it's no problem. The former CEO of Twitter, Dick Costolo, tweeted out, business leaders who continue to put profit above the needs of society must be put up against the wall and executed, and I'll do the video commentary. That's what he said. Basically, it's a death threat against this guy. And what happened? Twitter keeps this up. People were writing, enforce your own standards. Nothing. Stays. Okay? And at that point, you've got to take a step back and go, hang on a second. We have seen how destructive Twitter is by virtue of its foundations. Oversimplifying things is never helpful, and it's useless. And most of the time, you're not actually arguing with people, but you're actually arguing with their mental illnesses, okay? But now, you're giving people not to distinguish right and wrong, okay? But they can make their own facts up, like they have in the case of Hunter Biden's laptop. And yeah, I kind of think that what we're seeing in terms of how this is being covered now is you've got all of these wankers are coming out and saying, oh, yeah, we thought there was a little bit something suspicious about it, but we couldn't see it at the time. It was fucking right there. The evidence was on his laptop. And now all of these guys are coming out and saying, oh, well, it was like a little bit difficult. We couldn't really see it.
So
No,
I think
it's an amazing thing.
you touch on two really important points about America and the world, actually. One is freedom of speech is effectively a joke. There is no such thing anymore. We're all being censored on a daily basis. And the other, the mention of Hunter Biden, I ask, what if Donald Trump's son had behaved like Hunter Biden had done? I guarantee he would have been facing a series of indictments. America, to me, adding to the problems that that Douglas has alluded to with the systemic problems in the electoral system, but also America is joining the third world in selective application of the law. Certain people do appear to be above the law in America, and I'm afraid the Clintons fit that particular bill as far as I'm concerned. And I think it actually goes back to the Monica Lewinsky affair. I can remember thinking to myself, well, whatever happened in the Oval Office is one thing, and that's not necessarily criminal. But the man did perjure himself. He lied to a grand jury. Now, any American, as you know, Douglas, you go to jail for lying to a grand jury. But Clinton was acquitted, and that set a precedent. He was, in fact, above the law. And I think Hillary Clinton has shown that she's above the law. And now you're into very dangerous territory when you use the law as a political tool. That's what happens in third world countries, and it's happening here.
You know, I actually think,
but it's happening in America, and that to my mind is very, very disturbing.
I actually think that Clinton's like pissed off now that he wasn't like impeached or like had a criminal charge, because then he could have like been prevented from getting on the Lolita Express, which is much more damaging for his reputation than any of this. Like to be identified as like a frequent guest to Little St. James, okay, is like much worse than what he did to Monica Lewinsky.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, Hannes, we're going. It's our final round of items to review in 2020. So take it away.
All right. Well, look, I'm sort of banging on the same, vaguely the same topic, but following on from what I was saying a bit earlier about the environment, takes me into the dangerous realm of being a member of the pro-hunting lobby, and I know this is where I would have another major problem with the English Prime Minister's mother of his latest child, Kerry.
We don't know that. We don't know that yet.
Well, yeah, she's very anti-hunting, and she's leading the sort of lobby there to stop trophies being allowed back into the UK, for which she's getting thunderous applause. But yeah, my pitch is being a former hunter and knowing and being in touch, although I'm not directly involved anymore, all the hunting companies that I know throughout Africa that really, in a way, have been the only guys on the ground who actually try to look after any woodland, the remaining wildlife. The photographic guys do too, but you know, they can only operate in areas where there's abundant game, where you can take people on a photographic safari. The hunting companies operate in the remotest reaches of Africa, and generally hunters are of a robust disposition. They're prepared to take chances. They go to places that most people would probably not go to, and they operate there. And they are at the sort of, I think, the last men standing in the fight to save what's left of the wilderness in Africa, and doing anything effective for conservation. And, you know, they're all involved in community projects where there's hunting, there's generally, there's protein. So they're very popular with the communities. They're doing an enormous amount of good, and they're on their knees for one reason or another, but nothing's been helped by this hysteria that permeates the world now, and everybody's on the anti-hunting bandwagon. And again, I just say to myself, if only you knew the whole story, you'd shut your mouths. But it's just such a popular cause, and it's bad news for what's left of Africa when the hunting companies are finally pushed out of business, and then there's just a gigantic vacuum, and it'll be filled with the people you don't want in there, and that's bad news for the continent as a whole.
Is there here's a question for you, and I don't know if it's a marketing or branding thing. I mean, hunting in the West, professional hunting is so, you saw the Cecil the lion experience when an elderly lion was shot by mistake, I believe, or wrongly, but it set off a mass hysteria about a lion, right? And I remember what took place, and again, it's what I was going to speak about in my third section was like how we've curated our news and information for exactly what we want to hear. And I was thinking, like, there are people who are murdered in Zimbabwe, people who are detained, die in detention in Zimbabwe. These are human beings. They never make any the news, right? But Cecil the lion, geez, there was a dominated world media for weeks.
Cecil the lion.
Isn't it? Yeah, people were starving. You know, people are activists are getting detained or disappeared, and no one knows about that. But they knew everything about the lion. And
no, I'm sure.
Fascinating.
I'm sure Kerry Simons had lots to say about Cecil the lion, but she wouldn't have had much to say about people being bloody bludgeoned to death in the streets. You're right. That's the double standards. But this is the art of virtue signaling, which is what they're all about, is saying what gets you a bit of a fan club going, and lashing out at hunters is a great one.
So, you know, this was in 2015, okay? Do you know that this was the day that the Telegraph started losing its credibility? So this goes to both of your stories, because they reported on the story, and I think it was the American, who's like the shot Cecil, the American guy, American dentist or something.
Dentist, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so they're writing about this and how they're going to look after the rest of the family. So the environmental correspondent for the Telegraph writes, and she said, and I quote, I'll send you the guys this afterwards. She goes, Cecil's brother, who is also a lion, I swear to God she wrote that in the fucking Telegraph. Okay. She wrote that. So that's, anyway. Terrible.
No, these what upsets me about these people is they've got such big mouths when it comes to hurling abuse at people. But when you say to them, okay, so now what is the alternative? What are you going to do? How are you actually going to resolve these issues? That's where you don't see them for dust, because they haven't a cooking clue, nor do they care.
Carrie hasn't got any answers. She's just married to an oak who likes to have sex with a lot of women, and it doesn't even know how many children he has. So, yeah, I don't know. That's the reality, isn't it? Okay, Douglas, take us away with your third and final story, dude.
So it's actually following on a little bit from what we're saying, and maybe like a less gloomier outlook. I want to, it's sort of resolution as well for the new year. And it's to try and bridge this divide. We're in this, we're a very divided country, right? And I want to make an effort, and I want to persuade friends of mine, and I know I have a lot of friends on the right and a lot of friends on the left, and I kind of straddle these two worlds, okay? And I wanted to resolve to, I don't know, curate a media for myself in 2021 that I could tell friends about in, say, Zimbabwe or South Africa, like, read this, read that, step out of like your curated world and give this guy a go, or read this person. You mentioned, earlier you mentioned Glenn Greenwald. And I've noticed him and Matt Taibbi of Rolling Stone are guys on the left who people on the right are now reading. And I find that fascinating. And the same goes, I think, with people like Taibbi and Greenwald, and there are a whole bunch of very left-leaning journalists who are reaching out right, a way that was impossible for, like would have been unheard of 5-10 years ago, right? And that's what I see as hopeful for 2021, or maybe the next 4 years, is this idea that people, there are fundamentals, right? There are foundational principles, and one of them is free speech. You mentioned the story about Hunter Biden, okay? Completely repressed, censored before the election because it was so dangerous to one side, but the Twitter, the corporate technology, corporate media, they censored it, right? Then we found out now in the last week that actually he's being investigated by the FBI for this exact thing. It's not Russian disinformation. And people who are maybe apolitical or have been led to believe one side is lying and the other side is telling the truth are starting to see there's a bit of a breakthrough, I think, that we can't actually trust corporate media, right? And you can read someone like Greenwald, who is a principled guy on the left, and someone like Taibbi, another one on the left. And then you can also read people on the right who have the same principles. I like the Federalist. Molly Hemingway, for example. She's on the right. She's great. But I think that's what, if I'm sort of roundabout way, I want to say, like, to end on an optimistic note from this shit year that we've all had, is this idea that maybe there's a new way or coming together where those old boundaries no longer exist, and basically left, right, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're principles that we should all live by, and we should stand up for people whose politics we disagree with, because we believe in those foundational principles. Free speech for me is the ultimate thing.
Amen, dude. Amen.
Terrifying, these censors. That stuff that happens in dictatorships, and censorship for me is the most terrifying thing, and we're seeing it all the time.
Well, it's the old story. You can't really begin to find solutions if you can't have an honest discussion. And we don't even get to the honest discussion stage because you're forbidden to say certain things. So you can't even actually get to the core of the problem and try and work out how you're going to deal with it, because you're not allowed to say things.
Right. And those guys, those writers I mentioned, get pilloried, hey?
Yeah, totally.
Supposedly own side, they despise them.
Yeah.
They're like, you liked him when he was writing this, but you hate him when he's writing that. Like, maybe he's the consistent one.
Yeah, but the corporate media is it's on a hiding to nothing, and he's going to do that. I mean, his new model with Substack, which I've also joined, is like the way to do it. Independent.
Who started Substack? Who's
this dude in San Francisco? The other one that's there is Medium, and Medium is an ideological beast, which is run by Evan Williams, who's the co-founder of Twitter, and former CEO. And you don't want to go near that. I really didn't like them, and Substack are like just total writing, and that's it. Nothing else.
Okay.
Do whatever you want to do. And Greenwald's model is like, and he is going so hard at this incoming Harris-Biden charade. He is going so hard at them. Every single pick. Did you see how hard he went at that Neera Tandra?
Yes.
He went hard at this guy.
She's
Lloyd Austin.
Yeah.
So you got, and also, like if you look at the success of people like Joe Rogan, of like
absolutely,
Jaw, of like Tim Pool, all of these independent dudes, they are getting so much more popularity, and the guys who are sitting at the Guardian, which is, it should actually just implode tomorrow. The world would be, and I'll explain why in my third, but the New York Times, all of these places are terrified because you see what Joe Rogan's pool, or how many people listen to him. I mean,
Joe Rogan has 50 million downloads for a show.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And the other fascinating thing, Simon, about it is his an interview with him lasts 3 hours. Okay, we live again like we supposedly need these quick fixes that cable news, these quick sound bites that cable news shove through our brains, right? And Twitter is so like, put it down in like 180 characters. Rogan shows that people actually want to listen to in-depth people you disagree with for 3 hours. It's fantastic.
It's long form, in-depth, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to finish with my third now. And I'm going to go with Brexit, which is boring, but it's all I've ever known. Most of what I've known in Britain, I was here for the announcement of the referendum by David Cameron in the Bloomberg offices for the referendum, for the result, and through 3 years of uncertainty and sometimes humiliating defeats for Theresa May. And, like the most destructive thing about Brexit for me was... and first, let me say this. I am an outsider. So I see the merits of both camps. And I'll explain this more in detail now. But the most destructive thing about Brexit was this idea that Russia had occasioned Brexit upon Britain in the way that it had occasioned Donald Trump upon America. It was very obviously simply imported a controversial, conspiratorial idea that you could now... accuse a foreign power of meddling in your democracy. And it was supported and enabled, this rumor, because it's now been completely crushed in a London court. The journalist responsible for peddling these myths has been humiliated and has to pay £62,000 to another guy. But that was really destructive. Okay, that was for me. But in being able to see both sides and the merits of both, I listened to the most compelling articulation of the case to remain came from a dude called Lord Jonathan Sumption QC, former High Court judge. And it was very difficult to argue anything that guy said. And he put down the case in really objective legal language, which was amazing to read. And then, obviously, one of my companies is intimately involved in passporting and remittance, and I can assure you that for me, it's much better to remain under a centralized management, especially in terms of this kind of thing, than it is to try and now procure licenses in different European jurisdictions. And nonetheless, I sort of maintained relationships with good people on both the left and the right. So at the end of last year, I went to sort of one party to lament the departure for Remain guys, and then another to celebrate so-called independence with the Leave guys. And I left that Leave guys party, and I was this chasm that has formed between these two groups over the last 3 years is insurmountable. These guys are never ever going to see any sort of political coherence ever again, and it's a very tragic thing that's happened. And I go back to that Russian story because that poisoned the well in a long way. But there I was standing saying that there's going to be never any cooperation or item of national interest again. Lo and behold, 4 months later, the hardest Brexiteers are coming out and are marching in the street because same Jonathan Sumption, on the day lockdown was announced, came out and said, "You British government, you are fucking banged to rights. This is a democratic infraction of basic human rights and freedoms, and it's wrong. And he was the first pillar of resistance. So you had this peculiar situation where hard Brexiteers were now going, oh, fuck, we're talking to our enemies 4 months after this terrible sort of, and it gives me a lot of hope. Because, and, you know, on top of that, there were also guys who also supported Brexit wholeheartedly were like, yes, lock us down. Yes, take away these freedoms. So you have this cross-section of like, and it blurred the lines of the Brexit divisions. And my hope is that when these guys return to their tribes, which they're doing at the moment, because Brexit's a particularly hot subject today, as I speak. When they go back to their tribes, they will go back and remember that actually, you know, we learned there was a cordial way in which we learned with, you know, these guys. So let me stop being such a wanker, and let me take down from Twitter the anonymous profile I used to attack my political enemies, and let me find a more constructive way of engaging with people and with these guys. And so I think that if that does happen, that might be, like Douglas, to your point earlier, a way through our current impasse, because
our tribalism, we're in these tribes now, and you were saying about reverting to your tribe. That is hopefully the way we go through this, you know, pass through it, is actually starting to respect the other side, listen to what they have to say, allow them to say it.
Exactly.
Maybe it's just even going to be the market might decide. If someone like Rogan, who speaks to everyone and is, in my view, he seems apolitical, or he's left-right. He's kind of like what Hitchens called himself, a left conservative, or a conservative left, something like that. That was his term.
Exactly.
And that's, to me, is Joe Rogan. And the very fact that he gets so many viewers and listeners is the way, hopefully a way through this, because we're put in our tribes by corporate media, by cable news, Twitter.
Exactly.
And we need to get beyond that. And hopefully what you're saying is that's an optimistic way of...
I hope so, hey? I hope so. Okay, Hannes, now for our final little whip around, the legacy of Donald Trump. Answer it any which way you please.
The legacy, well, I don't know. But what I will say is I never understood the vitriolic hatred that came out of so many quarters for the man. From my understanding, Trump came to the presidency on a platform wanting to secure the country's borders. He wanted a better trade deal for America. He wanted to get America out of foreign wars, and he was a climate change skeptic, and he pulled out of the Paris Accords. And all of those goals, I would have thought, are admirable. And so why he drew such anger from the populace in the world remains something of a mystery to me. I think he was trying to do some of the right things. He was frustrated at every turn. No president's ever been attacked as viciously and as persistently as he was. I'm sure he made lots of mistakes, but he wasn't the ogre that everybody painted him out to be. But he was certainly absolutely demonized by a hostile, hysterical media. And I don't know if he'll ever be judged fairly, because the world has taken such a jaundiced view of this man. I don't know if he'll ever get a fair reckoning, quite honestly, but I certainly don't think he was as bad as everybody else does. And I've lost a few friends over Donald Trump, I can tell you that.
We all have.
Even in South Africa.
Of course.
Oh, hell yes.
Well, he dominated the discourse. He dominated the global conversation for so long. I agree with my saying, Hannes. On the other hand, I mean, he was a man of, like, he had no self-control with his, I mean, his first debate performance I thought was appalling. A man who needed to show that he could control his narcissism, or his if it temper is the right word, but he did such a poor performance in that first debate that I think it turned so many people off. Like, you're the president.
But, you know, I say to people,
Yeah.
look, Trump wasn't born to politics.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's
yeah,
for sure. We know he's a hard-bitten East Coast businessman, and he's been dealing on a
right,
tough
exactly,
all his life.
Yeah,
and
that's who he was. There was none of the polish or artifice of politics with him.
This is it. And I mean, they will say, but look at how smooth Obama was. Well, Obama couldn't go to for a piss without a teleprompter. He was being managed the whole time. Trump was never afraid to get out there and say what he thought. And
yeah,
he made a mess of it quite often, but he was trying to be honest. And he's not the most erudite of people, so
right.
He didn't come across well. But I respected the guy for trying to actually tell people what he was thinking, which you don't get from many politicians today.
Yeah, there was something, so asking about his legacy, I think there's something related to that, and it's very counterintuitive to what everyone said, because he was called a racist and a white supremacist for right? I think one legacy of his is going to be, or it appears to have been in this election, is that he's actually made the Republican Party less white, or he's minorities, certainly Hispanic voters in this election. I think he doubled the African American vote that he got, and he's made the Republican Party more working class and more representative of ordinary Americans. Okay, which is not what anyone would have. If you're living in your curated media world, you don't think that he's done that, okay? But he won. He got the most minority votes for a Republican president since 1960, which is quite extraordinary. And ironically, where he lost was with
middle class whites,
mostly like white suburbia, right?
Yeah.
They turned against him, and like a lot of minorities voted for him. Relates to what we were saying earlier, Simon, about the straddling these worlds. If you can break through your tribe, you can actually find things in common.
Absolutely.
In the most unlikely places.
So both of you have had a very sort of responsible analysis, and I can't better that. But what I've just thought of something now. You know, where I live in North London, my neighbours hate him. Okay, they hate him more than anyone. I promise you, there is graffiti in Swiss Cottage down the road about Donald Trump. Okay, it's like they'd make graffiti about a US president in a foreign capital outside a fucking £2 million house. Okay, so whenever there were protests, one in 2018, one in 2019, all of my neighbors, it becomes an event. The whole family goes. Okay, and they don't really work. They chill out, but like he's Orange Man bad, and North London's notorious for that. Okay, but he hates them apparently. He's told Oaks, no, he fucking hates these. Anyway, so if he wanted to really, really piss them off, okay, you know where their Tavistock Clinic is, their gender reassignment surgery. Okay, do like a hardcore fucking New York real estate takeover of the place. Okay, and turn it into a casino. Okay. So, or he could buy the place and turn it into like Trumpism campus, and you go there to like learn how to tweet or hold a rally, or like Miss World goes there to train to become Miss World, and like it was the gender reassignment surgery, and now it's fucking School of MAGA. My neighbors would be so pissed off. They would never, that would be brilliant. But that's all I can add to the subject.
Well, the other thing, another legacy, possibly, Simon, Johannes, was that the media, he had this relationship with the media that they both depended on each other. And what newspapers were dying off 4 years ago, and then he came along, and suddenly he just dominated every story, and they made it. And the same with cable TV, right?
They're going to miss him.
These organizations were failing. Okay.
I mean, CNN's had nothing to say about anything for 4 years.
When he goes away, I don't know if he's gonna. It doesn't seem like in his nature to keep quiet. But one of his, if he did that, I'm just wondering how these guys would survive. How mainstream or corporate media would survive without him.
Yeah,
the likes of Rogan that you could go to now.
Well, I mean, there's talk that he's going to start his own media company. That's basically what I've heard. But I think that's short of announcing candidacy for 2024, which that's the thing. The thing about Trump is that he I don't know if he's on Adderall, okay, but a lot of people say that he's on Adderall, okay, but like has so much energy, and I think it's because he doesn't drink, like he's never drank, and he's like, he eats like Kentucky Fried Chicken and pizzas and burgers and stuff, but it's just like he has COVID, and he goes up and he says like,
he's put up with what he has for the last 4 years, and to want another 4 years of it. Yeah. Astonishes me, but I don't think they're finished with him. I think they're going to go after him. He tweaked the tiger by the tail, and exactly. I think they're going to try and prosecute. They're going to find something to go after him, and I think he's going to be spending a lot of money on lawyers.
On a serious note, I was thinking, Douglas, and to finish. Imagine if he pardoned Edward Snowden and Julian Assange. Imagine what that would do. You would see. I mean, that would really piss the establishment off. But it depends. I mean, he's a bit of a con man. Okay, so does he know what actually happened there? Like, has he read enough to understand the treatment that these guys have suffered because of what they've done? That's what the question comes from.
One that interests me is he going to pardon Paul Manafort?
Yeah, good question.
He really is in jail because he was a Trump man.
Yeah.
Just like they went after Roger Stone.
Yeah. Roger Stone is I follow the guy on this new social media because he's really entertaining. But you know the story about him when he was like running this lobbying firm, he put like ads in the paper for like dudes to come and join him and his wife being intimate, and Manafort as well. Manafort like got Oaks to do with his wife. I mean, it's all very strange. This all came out, but there was a wonderful article published in the American Spectator about what is it with these Republican dudes watching other Oaks make love to their wives. It's unbelievable.
That's news to me.
Yeah. Anyways, guys, thank you very, very much for doing this. I think this was really entertaining, and thank you to the viewers and the readers of BizNews.com, and we are very grateful for your support. All we could do is encourage you to look at the likes of BizNews.com as an independent media source separate from the mainstream, and we look forward to your continued participation. All right. Thanks very much. Thanks, guys.
Nice meeting you guys. Cheers.